So, you know that feeling when you go to lift like a heavy box and just zap?
Oh, yeah, that terrifying sharp twinge in your lower back.
Right. You literally drop the box, you freeze, and you just reconsider every mechanical decision that led you to that exact position.
You're just standing there hoping it goes away.
Exactly. But instead of feeling that twinge, today we're going to completely reverse engineer it.
Yeah, we are.
We are Dr. Jaffrey's students, and we're going to make this easy for you.
We're stripping away all the mystery.
Totally. In this deep dive into his comprehensive lumbar spine masterclass, we're unpacking the sheer physics of your back to make it, entirely logical.
Because if you understand the structural architecture, like how the bony housing manages gravity, how the discs use fluid dynamics, and how the ligaments act as these like industrial tension cables,
Right.
then you can predict exactly how and why the system fails in a real-world clinical setting.
Yeah, the human spine has just an incredibly demanding job description. I mean, it operates as a protective vault for the spinal cord, a mobile axis for your torso, and the primary load transfer mechanism between your upper body and your legs.
It's a lot of work for 24 movable vertebrae.
It really is. And to map this out, Dr. Jaffrey uses this brilliant mnemonic, the meals of the day.
Oh, I love this one.
Right. So you have breakfast at 7, so that's 7 cervical vertebrae in the neck. Lunch at 12 gives you 12 thoracic vertebrae. And then dinner at 5 corresponds to the 5 massive lumbar vertebrae in your lower back.
And that architecture changes drastically as you move from breakfast down to dinner.
Yeah, it has to.
Like the cervical vertebrae are small and super mobile because they really only have to support the weight of your head.
Right.
But by the time you reach the lumbar spine, those 5 bones are carrying the entire compounding mass of your torso, your arms, and your head.
And that compounding mass explains the distinct anatomical changes we see in Dr. Jaffrey's slides.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, take the transverse processes, the bony wings sticking out the sides of each vertebra.
Right, the ones on the side.
Yes. In L1 through L4, those wings are relatively thin. They mostly just serve as leverage points for muscles like the psoas.
But then you hit L5.
Exactly. When you hit L5, those processes are just thick, dense, and heavily reinforced.
Because mechanically they have to be.
Right. It's the final anchor point attaching the movable spine to the pelvis via the iliolumbar ligaments. If those processes were thin, the rotational torque just from walking would, snap them right off.
Which is wild to think about. And, the geometry really dictates our survival under gravity.
Oh, for sure.
Like a perfectly straight vertical rod subjected to a top-down load is eventually just going to buckle.
Yeah, I can't handle the stress.
Exactly. So the body's evolutionary solution to this is spinal curves. We're born with these primary curves in the thoracic and sacral regions, which are kyphotic, right, curving outward.
Right.
But the magic really happens with the secondary curves, which are lordotic, curving inward.
Yeah. And those secondary curves don't just magically appear, they develop in direct response to motor milestones.
Yeah, when we start moving.
Right. The cervical curve forms when a baby first fights gravity to lift its head. And then the lumbar curve forms when that child finally stands up and learns to walk on 2 legs. The spine basically transforms into a literal coiled spring.
And the physics of that spring are just remarkable. Like, biomechanical models show that a curved spine can resist a compressive load exponentially better than a straight spine.
Wow.
Yeah, the alternating curves basically dissipate that axial force, redirecting it outward instead of letting it crash straight down through the bone.
Speaking of reversing those compressive loads, this biomechanical design totally explains my dog's morning routine.
Wait, your dog?
Yeah, every single time he wakes up, the very first thing he does is that perfect downward dog stretch.
Oh, yeah.
Paws way out, hips pulled all the way back, just dropping his spine into a deep stretch. He is instinctively decompressing his spine.
That's actually so true.
Right, he's separating those vertebral bodies to relieve the static pressure that built up while he slept.
Animals just inherently understand how to reset their passive restraints, which actually brings up a crucial clinical scenario for human patients.
Okay, lay it on me.
So let me quiz you on one of Dr. Jaffrey's specific class questions.
All right, I'm ready.
Let's say a patient presents in a physical therapy clinic with flat back syndrome.
Yeah.
They functionally lost that secondary lumbar curve due to poor posture or whatever. What is the immediate mechanical consequence?
Okay, well, if the spring is gone, The shock absorption is gone.
Exactly.
The axial load of gravity no longer dissipates through those reciprocal curves. It just drives straight down, plunging all that force directly into the joints and the discs.
Right. And what happens to the muscles?
Oh, right. Without the passive spring doing the work, the patient's paraspinal muscles have to remain in a state of constant active contraction just to keep them upright. So they walk into the clinic complaining of exhausting chronic muscle fatigue because their active muscle tissue is doing the job that the passive skeletal geometry was supposed to handle.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
And that muscular fatigue is really just the first symptom. The downstream effect of losing that spring brings us to the ultimate friction problem.
The bone-on-bone grinding.
Yeah, even with a healthy curve, the sheer compressive force of walking would shatter adjacent vertebrae if it were just bone hitting bone.
And the body's solution to that problem relies entirely on fluid dynamics. Enter the motion segment.
The jelly donuts.
Yes, two adjacent vertebrae and the intervertebral disc sandwiched right between them. This is where the physics get truly fascinating.
It really is. The intervertebral disc is basically a biological pressure vessel. You got this tough, fibrous outer ring called the annulus fibrosus.
Right?
And a gel-like center called the nucleus pulposus. And that nucleus is heavily populated with proteoglycans, which are highly hydrophilic.
Meaning they aggressively pull water into the center of the disc?
Exactly. Yeah. So when you stand up, gravity applies a massive axial compressive load down onto that disc.
And because water is basically non-compressible, the fluid in the nucleus has nowhere to go but outward.
Right. It pushes radially in all 360 degrees against the annulus fibrosus.
Which creates hydrostatic pressure. The compressive force pushing down is converted into lateral tension pulling against the rings of the annulus.
And the annulus is perfectly engineered for this. Its collagen fibers are arranged in these concentric layers, with each layer alternating at 65-degree angles.
That's so specific.
I know. But that specific geometry means that no matter which way you twist or bend or load the spine, half of those fibers will instantly pull taut to resist the force.
That's wild. And because that entire hydrostatic mechanism relies on water, the system experiences diurnal variation.
Oh, the height difference.
Yeah. During the day, the constant compressive load of walking and sitting literally squeezes water out of your discs. But at night, when you lie down and remove gravity, those hydrophilic proteoglycans suck the water right back in.
So you are genuinely a centimeter or two taller in the morning than you are when you go to bed.
Wait, hold on. I want to push back on a massive clinical assumption here.
Okay, what is it?
If hydrostatic pressure, the exact mechanism keeping the disc inflated and functional, relies entirely on dynamic movement to pump fluid in and out.
Yeah.
Does that mean the traditional medical advice of prescribing bed rest for acute back pain is actually the worst thing you can do for a deflated disc?
The biomechanics absolutely support that deduction.
Really?
Yeah. Discs are largely avascular. They don't have a direct blood supply. They rely entirely on a process called imbibition.
The physical pumping of fluid in and out.
Right. They need that movement to receive nutrients and expel waste. Immobilizing a patient in bed essentially starves the disc. It just accelerates its degradation.
Wow, so movement is mandatory for disc survival. Okay, so let's play out another one of Dr. Jaffrey's clinical applications here. I'm going to quiz you this time.
Here, give me.
With aging, discs lose the ability to absorb water, and they become permanently deflated. They lose their height. What are the specific architectural consequences for the lumbar spine?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so a loss of disc height triggers a catastrophic shift in load distribution.
How so?
Well, in a healthy spine, the massive intervertebral discs in the front carry about 80% of the body's axial load. The much smaller facet joints in the back carry only 20%.
Right, because the facet joints are designed to guide motion, not to bear heavy weight.
Exactly. But when the front of the house collapses because the disc is deflated, the weight has to go somewhere.
It shifts backward.
Yes. Suddenly, those tiny facet joints are taking on 50, 60, or even 70% of the load. They undergo massive mechanical stress, the cartilage wears away, and the patient develops severe facet joint osteoarthritis.
Ouch. And doesn't that collapse also compromise the nervous system?
It does. The intervertebral foramen, the lateral window where the spinal nerves exit the spinal cord, is bordered by the disc.
Right.
So when the disc loses height, the roof of that window physically drops. The tunnel narrows, which sets the stage for nerve impingement.
Man! Okay, so we've established how the discs manage compression, but gravity and movement are also creating massive shear and tension forces trying to rip the vertebrae apart.
Which brings us to the ligaments.
Yes, the duct tape of the spine. To counter all that force, the spine relies on an intricate network of ligaments acting as, like, industrial tension cables.
They provide the passive restraint system.
Ugh.
They basically dictate the absolute physical limits of how far the bones can travel before catastrophic failure.
And one of the most fascinating details from Dr. Jaffrey is about the ligamentum flavum.
Oh, the yellow one.
Yeah. Flavum means yellow, and it's yellow because it is composed of 80% elastin and only 20% collagen.
Which is a wild ratio for a ligament.
It really is. Mechanically, it sits posterior to the spine's axis of rotation, so when you bend completely forward into deep flexion, the ligamentum flavum has to stretch over this enormous distance.
And the elastin allows it to stretch without tearing.
Exactly. But more importantly, it stores all that kinetic energy. When you go to stand back up, that biological rubber band snaps back, assisting the multifidus and erector spinae muscles and saving you an incredible amount of metabolic energy.
That is super interesting. But, while the elastin serves a vital function, the primary stabilizers of the entire column are the longitudinal ligaments.
Right. The ALO and the PLL.
Yeah. The anterior longitudinal ligament, or ALL, runs down the front of the vertebral bodies. The posterior longitudinal ligament, or PLL, runs down the back, inside the spinal canal.
And they are not created equal.
Not at all. The AL is significantly wider and possesses twice the tensile strength of the PLL. It is actually the only ligament limiting extension.
Okay, total side note here, but my absolute favorite food is an absurdly massive overstuffed burrito.
Okay. Where are we going with this?
Just bear with me. After I eat one, I always push my plate away, rub my stomach, and lean way, way backward in my dining chair into, like, full spinal extension.
I see.
I've never thought about it until now, but during that post-burrito lean, the AL is the only ligament in the entire spine actively resisting extension. I am putting all my faith in that one anterior tension cable to keep my torso from snapping backward.
Well, your AL is definitely working overtime in that scenario.
It really is.
But honestly, the true test of the spine's tension cables doesn't happen in a dining chair. It happens at the L5S1 junction, where the bottom of the lumbar spine meets the sacrum.
Oh, right, because it's an inclined plane.
Exactly. The sacrum doesn't provide a flat, horizontal surface for L5 to sit on. There is a lumbosacral angle of roughly 30 degrees.
And the physics of that 30-degree slope change everything. Body weight is no longer just pushing straight down in simple compression.
Right. Gravity is split into two vectors. You have a normal force pushing the bones together and a massive anterior shear force.
Gravity is literally actively trying to slide your L5 vertebra forward, right off the cleft of the sacrum and into the pelvic basin. It's terrifying when you picture it. And the structures actively fighting that forward slide are the facet joints, the AL, and there's massively thick iliolumbar ligaments we talked about earlier.
They're the only things holding the system together. Which leads to our next clinical quiz.
Bring it on.
Okay, so if those restraints, the tension cables, the facets, if they fail, or if the bone itself fractures due to repetitive stress, and L5 actually begins to slide forward down that 30-degree slope, what is that clinical condition called?
That forward slippage is clinically diagnosed as spondylolisthesis.
Yep.
It is a profound mechanical failure. Orthopedic surgeons will actually grade the severity based on how far the vertebra has slipped forward over the sacrum from grade 1 to grade 4.
In severe cases, you can literally feel a step-off deformity on the patient's lower back where the bone has migrated forward.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of what happens when the passive restraint system is overcome by those anterior shear forces. Okay, so we've mapped out the static architecture, the fluid dynamics of the discs, and the tension of the ligaments. But to fully grasp Dr. Jaffrey's clinical applications, we have to put this entire biological machine into motion.
Right. The kinematics.
Because the kinematics of the lumbar spine dictate exactly how neurological symptoms present.
Okay, so the lumbar spine allows for about 45 to 55 degrees of forward flexion. When you bend forward, the vertebral bodies tilt anteriorly.
And the facet joints in the back glide superiorly, sliding upward and opening the joint space.
Most critically, the anterior portion of the intervertebral disc gets heavily compressed.
Exactly. And when you reverse the motion into extension, bending backward, the kinematics reverse.
The vertebral bodies tilt posteriorly, the facet joints glide inferiorly and compress together, and the posterior aspect of the disc is loaded.
So if the anatomy acts like this, fluid dynamic puzzle, a patient walking into a physical therapy clinic with a pinched nerve isn't just seeking generic pain management.
Right. The clinician's job is to find the exact physical angle of the spine that opens the specific joint space, relieving the nerve.
So let's play out another of Dr. Jaffrey's patient scenarios. I'll act as the clinician, you be the
Sounds
expert.
good.
You have a patient with foraminal stenosis. The intervertebral foramen, that lateral window for the nerve, is critically narrowed due to a deflated disc and arthritic bone spurs. The exiting nerve root is being crushed. Based on the kinematics, which movements increase or decrease their symptoms?
Okay, so we look at the mechanical effect of motion on the foramen. Extension, or bending backward, physically closes the intervertebral foramen.
Right.
It brings the roof down further, increasing the compression on the nerve and just skyrocketing the patient's pain. But flexion, bending forward, naturally opens the foramen, increasing the space and giving the nerve room to breathe.
Spot on. And this perfectly explains the shopping cart sign we see in older adults.
Oh, totally. People with lumbar stenosis will instinctively lean heavily forward onto their shopping carts at the grocery store.
They aren't just tired.
No. They are functionally maintaining spinal flexion to keep those lateral windows open so their nerves don't get pinched while they walk.
It's a brilliant subconscious adaptation. Okay, now let's reverse the quiz.
Oh, turning the tables. Okay.
A younger patient comes into the clinic. They lifted a heavy box with terrible form and suffered a posterior disc herniation. The annulus fibrosus tore, and the jelly-like nucleus pulposus is bulging straight backward into the spinal canal, pressing against a nerve root. Walk me through the fluid dynamics of their treatment.
All right. Think back to the disc as a water balloon trapped between two plates. If the patient bends forward into flexion, the anterior portions of the vertebrae pinch together.
Yeah.
That anterior compression squeezes the fluid inside the disc, forcing the nucleus pulposus to migrate posteriorly.
So you can backward.
Exactly. In this patient, forcing the jelly backward pushes it directly into the existing herniation, driving the disc material deeper into the spinal nerve. Flexion will send agonizing pain shooting down their leg.
So the mechanical solution requires reversing that fluid migration.
Exactly, by moving the patient into extension. If they bend backward, the posterior portions of the vertebrae pinch together. That posterior compression forces the nucleus pulposus to migrate anteriorly, pulling the jelly away from the spinal canal, away from the nerve root, and back toward the center of the disc.
Which is the entire biomechanical basis for the McKinsey method used in physical therapy to centralize herniated discs.
It all makes so much sense when you break it down like that. The clinical evaluations aren't just arbitrary tests, they are structural logic puzzles.
They really are. Once you understand that flexion compresses the front of the disc and opens the back of the foramen, while extension compresses the back of the disc and closes the foramen, you can diagnose the underlying tissue damage simply by watching how a patient reacts to movement.
The lumbar spine truly is a masterpiece of biological architecture. I mean, from the thick transverse processes of L5 anchoring us to our pelvis, to the alternating 65-degree collagen fibers of the annulus-resisting rotational torque, to the elastin-rich yellow ligaments storing kinetic energy.
Every single structure has a specific, highly engineered purpose to keep us moving efficiently through gravity.
It is a remarkable system, but, it is an architecture built and optimized for a very specific environment, dynamic bipedal movement.
Which leaves us with a final, somewhat unsettling thought to mull over.
Uh-oh.
Dr. Jaffrey pointed out that our secondary lumbar curve develops specifically to handle gravity when infants start standing and walking.
Right.
We also established the hydrostatic pressure keeping our intervertebral discs plump, hydrated, and capable of shock absorption relies entirely on the dynamic pumping mechanism of movement.
The imbibition process.
Exactly. Yet, modern society has engineered movement right out of our daily lives. We spend 8 to 10 hours a day in static seated positions.
Which applies massively higher compressive loads on the lumbar discs compared to just standing.
Yes. And it completely eliminates that imbibition process.
Yeah.
So by locking ourselves into office chairs and starving our discs of their mechanical pumping mechanism, are we essentially forcing our spines to de-evolve? Are we unlearning the very anatomical engineering that made human bipedalism possible in the first place?
That is heavy. Definitely something to think about the next time you feel a twinge.